Assalamu alaikum and a very good morning to all of you. I hope you've finally got up. I know some of you must still be lying in bed. After all, this is holiday season. Bhi chal raha hai. And from what I heard on the television last night, वो यही था कि the educational institutions will be opened in the first week of September. तो अभी तक कुछ नहीं पता. You may end up anywhere. अच्छा जी, तो रेटिना की डेवलपमेंट हमने कर ली थी, आई रिमेम्बर. ठीक है, so now let's start with the development of ciliary body. Ciliary body, ठीक है. अब आप हम choroid की layers पे आ गए हैं. Choroid की layers from posterior to anterior, you have the choroid layer. Yes, you are right. मैं सितंबर का भी कोई पता नहीं, लेकिन actually a lot depends on how people behave during. लास्ट टाइम भी जो सर्ज आया था ना, एकदम जो राइज किए थे केसेस, वो ईद के बाद, बिकॉज पीपल वर सो फॉन्ड ऑफ गोइंग आउट टू द मार्केट्स, टू द बाजार्स, बाइंग clothes, shoes, etc. As if not wearing new clothes or shoes on Eid was what do you call it? Gunai Kabira or something like it. For once in a lifetime, if you do not wear new clothes on Eid, if you do not wear new shoes, etc. on Eid, so I don't think anything really happens. कुछ फर्क नहीं पड़ता. ठीक है ना? Life is more important. But the sad part is, चलो निकल भी गए, not most of them were not even wearing masks, and that was a sad part. Even to this date, people are not really. They don't believe in corona. They say it does not exist. So इस किस्म के लोगों का, there's little you can do about them. So all you can do is, for this country, all you can do is pray. ठीक है ना? Better. And this is not peculiar to this country at all, because my son is in UK, he's working over there. He says people over there are more illiterate in so many ways compared to people over here. कहते हैं हमारे लोग बहुत बेहतर. वहाँ पे भी लोग हैं, they go out, they roam around, they play hand in hand, not wearing mask, no nothing. They also don't believe there's anything called corona. ठीक है? So just don't go and blame our people. Yes, we have. अच्छा कुछ नहीं कहते कि हम लोग क्या है. ओके, अल्लाह बेटा जिसमें भी हमारी, जिसमें भी हम सबकी बेहतरी हो, इस कौम की बेहतरी हो, अल्लाह को ही करना करे. So हम ciliary body पे थे. We were discussing the development of the eye. Ciliary body आपको पता है, is part of the choroid. जो choroid है ना, this was the vascular layer of the eye, the vascular coat of the eye, lying immediately outside this retina. ये retina था ना बेटा, this was the developing retina. ये outside pigment layer थी, ये inner non-pigment या neural layer थी जिसमें neurons थे, rods, bones, etc. And between the two, you had this space which was the intraretinal space. ठीक है? Later on, this intraretinal space, got obliterated because this layer, inner layer, neural retina, that rapidly proliferated, it rapidly grew in size and came and lay next to the pigment layer. The two layers, neural and pigment layer, fused, and this space, the intraretinal space, was finally obliterated. Now, outside this layer, you have, even in adults, you have the layer, the vascular layer, which is called choroid. So, ये जो choroid है, posterior aspect which is called choroid, anteriorly over here, this choroid over here. This choroid is replaced by ciliary body that contains muscles and blood vessels, etc. Choroid में सिर्फ blood vessels हैं. Ciliary body is a triangular area that has muscles and blood vessels, and at the margin of the optic cup. ये सारा optic cup है मुझे. At the margin of the optic cup, you have the iris. This iris, if you remember, partly covers the lens. इधर से भी थोड़ा सा एक्सटेंड करके लेंस के आगे आएगा, इधर से भी थोड़ा सा एक्सटेंड करके लेंस के आएगा, and the gap between the two edges of the iris is the pupil. ठीक है, ये तो normal anatomy हो गई. Now let's come to the development of ciliary body. लो जी, thank you very much. 94 लोग हो गए, एक एक करके लोग उठना शुरू हो गए. I hope you are having a good, healthy breakfast along with listening to this lecture. Even if you're not listening, but you've logged in. अब नाश्ता भी साथ साथ करते जाओ. Okay. So this was the choroid, the layer of blood vessels. ठीक है? The ciliary body, I told you, is simply the extension of the choroid. So बच्चा, ये सारा जो part है ना, ये, this is the ciliary body. Okay? अब ciliary body is like this. यहाँ पे, इधर पड़ी हुई है. Outside the retina. Mind you, these are the two layers of the optic cup that will develop into the, that have developed into the retina. Retina की development हमने कर ली है. कर ली है ना? Anybody? Can anybody remember? हमने की है ना retina की development? Yes. Thank you, Go. मुझे भी यही याद था कि हमने. Thank you, Sham. Thank you, my dears. अल्लाह ने इजाज़त दे आपको. तो मुझे यही याद है कि that is where we ended the lecture. अच्छा जी. So जी मुझे, thank you very much बेटे. Thank you so much. I really like it. I really appreciate it, Bapu, when you answer that. There's a sense of participation. There's a sense of being alive. Otherwise, though, it is like talking to a wall, talking to these dead things lying in front of me. This bouquet of flowers. ठीक है ना, इस किस्म की चीजें जो हैं, artificial flowers, आपके decoration pieces वगैरह. Otherwise, जब आप लोग जवाब देते तो बड़ा अच्छा लगता है कि नहीं बच्चे हैं सामने. Okay, finally let's start. ये ciliary body. This is the ciliary body, beta, and this is where the ciliary body is over here. ठीक है? So it's going to have a surface which will face the retina, so that either ये. This surface is the medial surface. So this is the medial surface of the ciliary body, and this medial surface has these processes which are called ciliary processes. ठीक है? अब आप ये देख लीजिए, retina की दो layers हैं बेटा. The outer one is the pigment layer, the inner one is the neural layer. अब ये इन्हीं दो layers को follow करती जाएंगी. ठीक है? यहाँ पे इन्हीं दो layers को follow करेंगी. The outer is dark line, which is the pigment layer. अब inner जो है non-pigment layer होती है. ठीक है? ये नॉन पिगमेंट लेयर है, कनेक्टिव टिश्यू है, सेल्स हैं, सपोर्टिंग सेल्स हैं, लेकिन इसमें नॉन न्यूरल लेयर कहते हैं इसको, नॉन न्यूरल। दैट मीन्स कि इसमें न्यूरॉन्स कोई नहीं है, कनेक्टिव टिश्यू है, सेल्स हैं, supporting cells हैं, cells other than neurons. So ciliary body is covered by epithelium, a double layer. The outside is pigment epithelium and on the inside बिल्कुल इस तरह, outside pigment epithelium, on the inside. In the case of ciliary bodies, it is a non-pigment layer. This double layer of epithelium is simply thrown into folds on the medial aspect. These folds are called ciliary processes. This is the mesenchyme surrounding the vascular layer. This mesenchyme develops into the muscles, ये ciliary muscles, ये और इनके cut sections. So the mesenchyme surrounding the ciliary body, developing ciliary body, this develops from the surrounding mesenchyme. कौन सी mesenchyme? यहाँ पे ये जो edge of the optic cup पे जो mesenchyme है, this develops into ciliary muscles. Okay. Moving ahead. Next layer iris की होती है बेटा. The layer of iris. ये, this is the iris. Okay. यहाँ पे, this is the iris. Iris is simply an anterior extension of the ciliary body. Okay. Iris is, अब ये देख सकते हैं, this is the developing ciliary choroid, the vascular layer, ये जो dots, red dots हैं. Then this is the developing ciliary body, and over here comes the iris. Okay, this is now the developing iris over here. Iris, I told you, was simply a curtain, kind of a curtain. As the iris develops from the edge of the optic cup, ये optic cup है ना बेटा, इसकी edge से या इसके rim से develop होता है. It extends forwards, partially covering the lens. Here you can see it extending forwards, and the gap between the two ends, the two edges of the iris, ye gap, this is the pupil. So from the edge, from the rim of the optic cup develops the iris. This develops from mesenchyme. Mesenchyme अभी आपको बता देते हैं, न्यूरोएक्टोडर्म की जो मेसेंकाइम होती है वहां से. अब ये जो रेटिना की जो दो लेयर्स थी, ऑप्टिक कप की ये जो दो लेयर्स थी, they continue with the ciliary body, and then the ciliary body continues forwards with the iris. ठीक है, वही दो लेयर, inner pigmented, outer non-neural layer. जबकि the connective tissue of the iris, this comes from neural crest cells. So neural crest cells contribute to the connective tissue of the iris. और iris के muscles, I think you remember, you have the sphincter pupillae and the dilator pupillae. ये जो muscles हैं, they come from the neuroectoderm of the optic cup. So optic cup की जो neuroectoderm थी, they develop into the dilator pupillae and the sphincter pupillae muscles. और ये जो muscles develop होते हैं ना बेटा, they developed as a result of transformation of the epithelial cells into smooth muscle cells. So the epithelial cells हैं, they transform into smooth muscle cells, and that is how the sphincter and dilator pupillae form. लेकिन contribution ये neuroectoderm से इनको आएगी. ओके, कोरॉइड और स्क्लेरा की बात कर रहे हैं. अभी तक हमने यहाँ पे जो वैस्कुलर लेयर है उसके दो पार्ट्स किए हैं. हमने आइरिस किया है और यहाँ पे हमने सिलरी बॉडी की है. ठीक है, अब ये जो ऑप्टिक कप की जो मेसेनकाइम है, मेसेनकाइम सराउंडिंग द ऑप्टिक कप, ये ऑप्टिक कप है ना बच्चे, दिस इज द मेसेनकाइम दैट इज सराउंडिंग द ऑप्टिक कप। फिफ्थ वीक में ये जो मेसेनकाइम है, इट एंटर्स बिटवीन द लेंस एंड द सरफेस ऑफ द लेंस, ये देख लीजिए। Okay? And now I'm going to talk about this mesenchyme, the mesenchyme which is overlying the retina. ये retina है, this is the mesenchyme overlying the retina. ये जो mesenchyme on the surface of the retina है, ये split कर जाती है into two layers. This mesenchyme splits into two layers. The inner layer, which is in contact with the pigment epithelium of the retina, this inner layer develops into the choroid. So ये जो mesenchyme की layer surrounding the retina, the part of the mesenchymal layer which is in contact with the pigment layer of the retina, this develops into choroid. और choroid जो है आगे जाके इस हम लोग उसको the leptomeninges अगर आपको याद हो, pia arachnoid, pia matter, arachnoid matter, collectively are called leptomeninges. ठीक है, जब ये जो outer layer होती है ना, this develops into a fibrous layer which is the sclera, white part of the eye. ठीक है, one last time let me repeat this. Optic cup, this is the optic cup, this is the pigment layer, this is the neural layer. Okay, you have mesenchyme surrounding the optic cup. This mesenchyme splits into two. The inner layer which is in contact with the pigment layer of the optic cup, ये जो inner layer है, this develops into choroid, and the outer layer develops into the white part of the eye which is the sclera. और ये जो sclera है, ये this white part, this continues forwards as the cornea की जो stroma है, ये भी आगे जाके करेंगे. So the earliest blood vessels that develop in the choroid over here, now we are talking about this part. The earliest blood vessels develop in 15th week, and by the 23rd week of development, the blood vessels are all well developed. अब मुझे बताइए, so far do we have any problems? Before I go any further, do we have any problems? लगता है कोई नहीं. No ma'am, thank you my dear, thank you जी. नहीं है तो बहुत अच्छी बात है. I'll move ahead. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Iris repeat करती. Thank you. I'm so glad. That means that you were listening. Good. मैं Iris repeat करती. वो क्या था? अच्छा जी, Iris एक तो I hope कि you remember कि Iris था क्या? Iris was simply sorry. I'm so sorry. Normal anatomy of the iris अगर आप recall करें बेटा, तो normal anatomy of the iris में iris was just an extension, forward extension of the ciliary body. This is approximately the site where you have the ciliary body. ये देख लीजिए mark किया हुआ है. Anterior edge of the optic cup से ciliary body develop हुई थी, and the ciliary body extends forwards as the iris. ठीक है? It extends forwards and partly covers the lens. ये lens है, तो the iris, इसीलिए इसको iris diaphragm कहते हैं. The iris partly covers the lens. अब बेटा जी आप ये देखिए कि this is the pigment layer of the optic cup. ये सारी optic cup चल रही है. This is the pigment layer of the optic cup. This is the neural layer of the optic cup. ठीक है? अब ये जो दो layers optic cup की हैं, they continue forwards as the epithelium of the iris and the ciliary body. मैं इसलिए एपिथेलियम कह रही हूँ बेटा, बिकॉज ये आयरस है, इस आयरस का जो बल्क है, मसल्स एंड कनेक्टिव टिश्यू की हम बात कर रहे हैं। मसल्स ऑफ द आयरस जो हैं, दे डेवलप फ्रॉम न्यूरोएक्टोडर्म, ऑप्टिक कप की न्यूरोएक्टोडर्म से। सो द मसल्स आर लाइंग आउटसाइड, ये मसल्स ऑफ द आयरस है, सेलरी बॉडी है, ये मसल्स ऑफ द आयरस है इन कंटिन्यूटी। This is the epithelium of the ciliary body and this continues forwards as epithelium of the iris. ये बहुत खूबसूरत ड्राइंग है, this is taken from Langman, ठीक है, और इससे बहुत कुछ एक्सप्लेन हो जाता है। और ये जो मसल्स हैं, ये फिर न्यूरोएक्टोडर्म से डेवलप होते हैं आउटसाइड द एपिथेलियम, आउटसाइड द एपिथेलियम। यहाँ पे देख लीजिए, ये आयरस है, ये आयरस है, ठीक है, ये सिलरी मसल्स है, सिलरी बॉडी है। सो द सिलरी epithelium of the ciliary body is simply getting continuous with the epithelium of the iris. ये बस इसमें दिखाया और कुछ ओके। यहाँ पे भी देख लीजिए, यहाँ ज्यादा सिंपल है। The epithelium of the ciliary body continues as the epithelium of the iris and the ये जो epithelium के जो मसल्स हैं आयरिस के, they develop as simply transformation of epithelial cells into smooth muscle cells. ये मसल्स हैं on the outside, ये देख लीजिए, ये मसल्स हैं on the outside, ये देखिए। This is simply the layer which is in continuity with the layers of the optic cup. अब बता दो बेटा, समझ आ गई? समझ आ गई है या मजीद कंफ्यूज कर दिया मैंने आप? यस मैम, उसका मतलब है कि समझ आ गई है। ओके फाइन, यू ऑलवेज वेलकम माय डियर, यू मोर देन वेलकम। कोरोइड एंड स्क्लेरा हमने कर लिया था। एपोस्टिमस की बात कर लेते हैं। अब आपको अगर याद हो तो, अगर मैं इसकी नॉर्मल एनाटॉमी बताऊं तो दिस वाज द स्पेस, दिस इज द लेंस, दिस इज द डेवलपिंग लेंस, ये सिलरी बॉडी है और ये सिलरी प्रोसेसेस हैं। द सिलरी प्रोसेसेस पे यू हैव द अटैचमेंट ऑफ दीज cord like zonules, ciliary zonules, strands होते हैं connective tissue के, they connect the ciliary body to the lens, ठीक है। one more, okay, choroid and vascular layer same होती है, बिल्कुल होती है बेटा, बिल्कुल होती है। choroid and vascular layer is the same. The vascular layer is given the name choroid. जरा थोड़ा सा, just like I am not called a लड़की या lady or something. I have a name. आपको लड़की या lady या कुछ नहीं कहते हैं बेटा, आपका एक नाम है सानिया, ठीक है। इसी तरह vascular layer का भी एक नाम है और ये नाम है choroid। अच्छा, मैं देखती हूँ कहाँ डिफरेंट लेबल किया हुआ है, क्योंकि अभी पूरी लेयर तो हमने देखी नहीं। लेट्स सी कहाँ पे डिफरेंट लेबल किया हुआ है। जी, अब देखते हैं क्या है। ये आउटर वैस्कुलर लेयर है, इनर वैस्कुलर लेयर तो हाइलाइड आर्टरी की ब्रांचेस है ना, ये रेटिना की सप्लाई के लिए है। दिस इज द आउटर वैस्कुलर लेयर, यहाँ पे इधर सिलरी मसल्स हैं जो सिलरी बॉडी के हैं, इधर आयरस के मसल्स हैं, ये सिलरी प्रोसेसेस हैं. Were you talking about this drawing, Sanya? Yeah. Only outer layer is choroid. ये जो inner vascular layer जो इसने label की हुई है ना बेटा, this is simply the blood supply from the hyaloid artery. The inner neural layer जो थी, उसकी supply इस hyaloid artery से आ रही थी. Later on ये hyaloid artery मैंने आपको बताया था ये degenerate कर जाती है, ठीक है. लेकिन जो mesenchyme surrounding ये जो है, this develops into choroid layer. ये choroid layer में develop होती है, ठीक है. इसका anterior end is ciliary body and still anterior you have the iris. So iris, ciliary body and choroid, one continuous layer, one continuous parts of vascular layer. Okay, thank you my dear. I'm so happy, I'm so glad कि आप अपनी ambiguities को clear कर रहे हो. क्लेरा हो गया था and हम aqueous chambers की बात कर रहे थे. So this is the lens, this is the iris, this is the ciliary body. Okay. The gap between the two ends of the iris is the pupil. I mean, I'm talking about this area in front of the lens and behind this is simply the anterior chamber का जो anterior end है, ये cornea की posterior surface होती है. Okay, surface ectoderm जो होती है ना, that develops into cornea. अभी cornea दिखाते हैं. Now this is divided into two parts. This entire space from the posterior surface of the cornea to the anterior surface of the lens. This entire space is divided into two parts by the presence of this lens, by the presence of iris. So you have a part which is between the iris and the cornea, posterior surface of the cornea, or iris ke darmiyan. You have this part which is the anterior chamber, and then you have this part behind the iris and in front of the lens. This part is called the posterior chamber. Okay. So ये जो posterior chamber है ना, this is simply development of the space. जो mesenchyme of the optic cup है, this mesenchyme इसमें clefts appear करते हैं, and then these clefts join together and form a space posterior to the iris and anterior to the lens. This develops into posterior chamber. I repeat once again, the mesenchyme on the anterior aspect of the optic cup. Clefts appear in this mesenchyme. These clefts join together and form a space. This space is between the posterior surface of the iris and the anterior surface of the lens. This space is called posterior chamber. Okay? And then you have this space. I'm sorry. This is the anterior chamber. अब इधर जो mesenchyme थी, जब हमने लेंस की डेवलपमेंट की थी, आई होप यू रिमेम्बर, मैंने आपको बताया था कि द लेंस इज surrounded by a layer of mesenchyme. Anteriorly, this layer of mesenchyme develops into iridopupillary membrane. यहाँ पे you had the formation of iridopupillary membrane. This iridopupillary membrane then disappears at the age of 6 months of intrauterine life. Cornea. Remember your cornea, the transparent part, avascular transparent part of the eye. So आप ये समझिए कि this is approximately where the cornea is. Okay. अब हमने शुरू में बात की थी कि कॉर्निया की जो डेवलपमेंट है दैट इज इंड्यूस्ड बाय द अंडरलाइंग लेंस वेसिकल. जो लेंस वेसिकल डेवलप हुआ था ये लेंस है, लेंस वेसिकल है. दिस लेंस वेसिकल व्हाइल इट वाज in the process of developing, this induced the overlying epithelium to thicken and develop later on into the cornea. अच्छा, अब इसके सोर्सेस क्या हैं? ये जो इसकी आउटर एपिथेलियम है, ये सारा जो है ना बेटा, ऑल दिस पार्ट, ये सारा का सारा अभी के लिए ये कॉर्निया है, डेवलपिंग कॉर्निया है. ठीक है. सो द सरफेस एपिथेलियम, सरफेस एक्टोडर्म, ये जो है, the ectoderm develops into the corneal epithelium. Okay. Then comes mesenchyme. Mesenchyme develops into the substantia propria and the corneal endothelium. ये endothelium. Okay. और इस endothelium में जो mesenchyme से बनी है, ये mesenchyme neural crest cells से आती है. So you have three sources. Ectoderm surface epithelium बनाता है. This mesenchyme develops into substantia propria and corneal endothelium also develops from mesenchyme that comes from neural crest cells. बेटा कॉर्निया की बेसिकली अगर आपने इसकी हिस्टोलॉजी भी नहीं पढ़ी, आजकल आप पिट्यूटरी की हिस्टोलॉजी पढ़ रहे हैं. कॉर्निया की 3 लेयर्स होती हैं. आउटर एपिथेलियम होती है, then you have a thick layer of connective tissue, and the innermost is the layer of endothelium. Endothelium की layer वो होती है that is resting on the inner surface of the eye. ये देख लीजिए. I'm talking about this particular layer. ये corneal endothelium की, which is in contact with the anterior chamber. This is the endothelium. The outside is the corneal epithelium, जो कि एक्टोडर्म से बन रही है. और इनके दोनों के दरमियान ये जो पार्ट है ना, ये कनेक्टिव टिश्यू स्ट्रोमा है, जिसको सब्सटैंशिया प्रोप्रिया कहते हैं. ये वर्ड जो है, दिस इज सिंपली कनेक्टिव टिश्यू स्ट्रोमा. डू आई मेक माई सेल्फ क्लियर ओवर हियर? कोई कंफ्यूजन तो नहीं मैंने क्रिएट कर दी? अच्छा, it seems things are clear. नेक्स्ट पे आ जाते हैं, and that is the thank you my dear, thank you मुझे. So good to see that आप लोग जाग रहे हो. विट्रियस की डेवलपमेंट पे आ जाते हैं बेटा. विट्रियस आपको पता है, ठीक है ना? विट्रियस इज दैट पार्ट ऑफ द जेलाटिनस पार्ट है, थिक जेलाटिनस पार्ट है, which is lying posterior to the lens and anterior to the inner layer of retina. So between the retina and the lens, posterior surface of the lens, you have this gelatinous material which is called vitreal body. Now, अब आप यहाँ पे देख लीजिए कि to begin with, in the early parts of the development, the lens and the retina, they were in contact with each other. When the eye grew in size, when it enlarged in size, so the neural layer of retina moved away from the developing lens, and this is what happened. Okay? The retina moved away from the lens, but as it was doing so, now you have epithelium lining the lens, you have cells lining the retina. So the processes of these cells remain connected. As a result, ये साइटोप्लाज्मिक प्रोसेसेस होते हैं, ठीक है? As a result, एक नेटवर्क ऑफ फाइबर्स बन जाता है. यहाँ से भी प्रोसेसेस ऑफ सेल्स हैं, यहाँ से भी प्रोसेस ऑफ सेल्स हैं. A network of fibers remains, and this network of fibers is called primary vitreous body. अब ये network of cells फिर वही वाली बात है, कहाँ से आए? Some of are contributed by the lens. Some network of fibers are contributed by the lens, and some of the fibers are contributed by the retina. ठीक है? अब initially तो जो fibers develop होते हैं, they contribute to the formation of vitreous body. Later on, जो fibers develop होते हैं, they develop in this area. They connect the ciliary body with the lens. ये fibers, they are called suspensory ligament of the eye, या इसको ciliary zonule भी कहते हैं. ये, okay? ये बात समझ में आ गई है? Fine, I guess आ गई होगी. You have processes running between the neural part of the retina and the lens. These processes from one end to the other, they make up the network and are called primary vitreous body. Obviously, these processes, they come from the lens, contributed by the lens, they are contributed by the retina. But later on, जो processes develop होते हैं, वो anterior aspect पे develop होते हैं. They extend between the ciliary body and the lens. These processes are called ciliary zonules. Okay. So यहाँ पे you have the developing vitreous body. ठीक है? Now these were the two layers of optic cup that develop into retina. Mesenchyme यहाँ से enter की, and this mesenchyme is now lying between the वो जो fibrous strands जो थी primary vitreous body, ठीक है ना? वो जो cytoplasmic processes extending between the lens and the retina, neural layer of retina, उनके दरमियान. So ये जो mesenchyme enter की, that is now lying between these primary fibers. This develops now into, with further development, this mesenchyme transforms into a gelatinous substance, jelly-like substance. Okay? When this jelly-like substance is invaded by cells, we call it a secondary vitreous body. अब ये cells कौन से हैं? उसमें substances कौन से हैं? उसमें cells होंगे जिनको hyalocytes कहते हैं. वो enter करते हैं इस gelatinous secondary vitreous प्राइमरी विट्रस बॉडी को सेल्स इन्वेड करते हैं. इट इज इन्वेडेड बाय सेल्स जो कॉल्ड हाइलोसाइट्स. इसका जो mesenchyme है, this transforms into collagen material, and then of course it is invaded by hyaluronic acid. When all these substances become part of this primary vitreous body, now with the presence of these three substances, this structure is now called secondary vitreous body. So primary vitreous body was only the cytoplasmic processes, ठीक है, plus some mesenchyme that entered in between the cytoplasmic processes. ये primary vitreous body थी. When this primary vitreous body gets invaded by cells, hyelocytes, when the mesenchyme transforms into collagen material, and when this area is invaded by hyaluronic acid, then we, with the presence of all these structures, all these substances, this now transforms into the secondary vitreous body. अब आ जाते हैं कि मैंने आपसे कहा था कि this is the central artery of the retina. Okay, this is the blood supply to the eye. So I told you it entered the optic cup and it entered the optic stalk. Optic stalk में hyaloid artery develop हुई थी. That was supplying blood to the optic stalk, also entering into the optic cup. Okay? But later on in the development, I told you this distal part of the hyaloid artery, this degenerates, और ये जो proximal part है, this develops into the central artery of the retina. Now, earlier in the development, ये जो hyaloid artery है, इसकी branches, they were lining the inside of the inner layer of या neural layer of retina. ये वही blood vessels हैं जो आपके लिए confusion create कर रहे हैं. ठीक है? Now, these blood vessels, they also surround the lens. So posteriorly, they form a connective vascular layer around the lens, which is called tunica vasculosa lentis, or anteriorly iridopupillary membrane develop हो जाती है. But once the lens is mature, it does not require any blood vessel for its nutrition. Anteriorly, ये chamber है, anterior and posterior chamber जिसमें aqueous humor है. So anterior aspect is of the lens is receiving its nutrition from aqueous humor, जबकि posterior in surface of the lens जो है, this can easily get its nutrition from the vitreous body. As a result, ये जो distal part of the hyaloid artery है, since it has no purpose now, it is not one, has no function now, so it degenerates. वो degenerate तो कर जाती है, लेकिन वो जो canal कह लें या pathway कह लें, that extends from the edge of the optic cup to the lens, this pathway remains. The canal, this persists. This is called the hyaloid canal. ठीक है? So समझ में आ गया बेटा? Any question? कोई क्वेश्चन नहीं है. चलो ठीक है. अच्छा जी, if there are no questions, so let's go on to the development of the eyelids. I was supposed to finish this development of the eye, लेकिन somehow नहीं हो सकी. Vitreous body repeat कर दो. Okay, fine. कोई मसला नहीं. अच्छा जी, vitreous body. Just give me a second, because I want to sip of water. Vitreous body means simply, एक बात याद रख लीजिए कि this is developing lens vesicle, okay? And this is the optic cup. Lens vesicle is lying in the optic cup. Okay? To begin with, the lens vesicle is in contact with the optic cup, inner layer of the optic cup. Okay? Now, when the optic cup develops further, it enlarges in size, ज़्यादा rapidly enlarge करता है compared to the lens vesicle. As a result, this is what it looks like. The optic cup, sorry, the lens vesicle lying inside this optic cup. Now the two have separated from each other. पहले they were in contact, then they separated. लेकिन ये separation complete नहीं है, because cytoplasmic processes from the retina, inner layer of the retina, that extends to the lens vesicle. Similarly, cytoplasmic processes from the lens also extend and go up to the neural layer of the retina. Okay. Now, this structure, यहाँ पहले भी mesenchyme थी, अब इसमें cytoplasmic processes आ गए. So this structure that develops with some mesenchyme and cytoplasmic processes, this structure is called primary vitreous body. Okay? और फिर ये जो कुछ ये जो cytoplasmic processes हैं that extend between the ciliary body and the lens, मैं पहले भी आपको बता चुकी हूँ. इनको ciliary zonules कहते हैं, suspensory ligament of the lens कहते हैं. तो ये तो हो गई प्राइमरी विट्रस बॉडी. अब आ जाते हैं सेकेंडरी विट्रस बॉडी. नाउ व्हाट हैपेंस इज कि प्राइमरी विट्रस बॉडी हमने बना ली. सो इट वाज मेसेनकाइम प्लस दीस साइटोप्लाज्मिक प्रोसेसेस. नाउ व्हाट हैपेंस इज कि इस मेसेनकाइम, दिस इज एंटर्ड बाय few substances, namely hyaluronic acid इसमें enter करता है इस mesenchyme में. इसमें cells enter करते हैं. These cells are called hyocytes. और कुछ ये mesenchyme जो है इसमें collagen material develop हो जाता है. ठीक है? So when these three substances, when they become part of the primary vitreous body, now this entire structure is called a secondary vitreous body. Okay. The primary vitreous body being invaded by the cell's collagen fibers, collagen material, and hyaluronic acid is called a secondary vitreous body. अब ये आपको बताया था hyaloid artery थी, hyaloid canal में. This hyaloid artery was present in the optic stalk, and it extended into the optic cup. And optic cup may it traveled as far as the developing lens vesicle. It gave its blood supply to the inner layer of the retina. It also supplied the lens all around. Posteriorly, the lens के give the artery, it forms a capsule which is called tunica vasculosa lentis. Anteriorly, जब इसने surround किया था lens को, तो it developed into iridopupillary membrane. हमने अभी डिस्कस किया है iridopupillary membrane. हाइलोसाइट्स का ओरिजिन बेटा क्वेश्चनेबल है. कुछ कहते हैं कि ये मेसेनकाइम से ही डेवलप होता है, कुछ कहते हैं ये न्यूरल क्रेस्ट सेल से आता है. बहरहाल इसका जो ओरिजिन है दैट इज क्वेश्चनेबल. But the thing is, it becomes part of the this vitreous body. Okay, so ये हाइलाइट आर्टरी जो है इन दी ऑप्टिक कप्स डिजनरेट्स, इसलिए डिजनरेट कर जाती है बिकॉज ट्यूनिका वास्कुलर लेंटिस भी डिजनरेट कर जाता है, उसकी वजह से एरिथ्रोपिपिलरी मेम्ब्रेन भी डिजनरेट कर देती है. The reason being that they do not require any blood supply. The artery disappears, but pathway of the artery remains. So running through the center of the vitreous, you have this pathway which is called the hyaloid canal. ये actually एक canal है जो आपको थर्मोस्कोपी पे नजर आता है. आगे चले. आइलेट्स पे आ जाते हैं जी. Okay, let's move ahead. ये these are the eyelids, developing eyelids. ठीक है, the eyelids develop from mesenchyme, surrounding mesenchyme. ये mesenchyme जो है, this comes from neural crest cells. So this is neural crest mesenchyme developing into the eyelids. Obviously, this neural crest mesenchyme is surrounded by a layer of ectoderm. Thank you, Komal. Thank you, Gaur. आप लोगों को समझ आ रहे हैं. I'm so happy. I'm so happy with you people. Such a wonderful bunch of little girls and boys we have. Okay, so finally, from 33, I've jumped on to 133. That's improvement. Good. Never mind. The classes start actually a little early, 10 o'clock. I'm not being sarcastic. Beta, 10 o'clock in the morning for during holidays is early. Because holidays mean you go on to sleep till, say, what, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, till Amma comes with a danda in her hand. And that is when you get up. This is normal. आजकल जो आपके साथ शुरू हो रहा है 10 बजे उठना पड़ रहा है छुट्टियों में क्लास के लिए. I feel sorry for you people. लेकिन अब क्या करें, पढ़ना तो है ना बेटा. ठीक है, आइलेट्स की बात कर रहे थे. अभी दान साहब कहेंगे मैडम आपका टाइम खत्म हो गया. So, इससे पहले हम थोड़ी सी आइलेट्स की बात करते हैं. So I told you eyelids was simply a fold of surface ectoderm. As fold में you had mesenchyme, neural crest mesenchyme. ठीक है. These eyelids they grow towards each other. ये folds जो है ectoderm का they grow towards each other, and ultimately they fuse with each other at the ये देख लें ये they are growing towards each other यहाँ पे growing immediately, and ultimately 10th week of intrauterine life they fuse with each other, and this fusion remain fused till say about 26 or 28 weeks तक. ठीक है, ये कॉर्निया के लेयर्स जो अभी आपको मैंने बताई हैं, surface ectoderm, mesenchyme and endothelium. Okay, अच्छा. So हम eyelids की बात कर रहे थे. They remain fused up till 26 to 28 weeks of intrauterine life. Now the gap between them, the gap between the anterior surface of the cornea and the posterior surface of the eyelid, between the eyelid and this is the cornea. This is the gap between the eyelid and the cornea. So this whitish is the gap between them. ये जो gap है ना, this is conjunctival sac. याद है आपको conjunctival sac eye में पढ़ी थी हमने. अब ये जो sac है conjunctival sac, this is lined by ectoderm. Ectoderm के fold से ही बनी है ना, so it is lined by ectoderm. Cornea की भी outer layer ectoderm है. ये जो आपका fold है that will develop into eyelid, this also is ectodermal line. So this conjunctival sac is lined by ectoderm. ठीक है ना? So 5th वीक में जाके ये जो फ्यूज्ड eyelids की जो एक firm fusion है, this breaks down and now the baby is able to move the eyelids, blink कर सकता है, the eyes reopen 7th week onwards. Okay, sorry. अच्छा जी, अब आपको ये भी पता है कि ये जो eyelids हैं इनकी and this conjunctival sac, this is lined by conjunctiva, ठीक है. The और आप you know very well cornea is not covered by conjunctiva. Cornea is transparent. Cornea is not covered by anything, but part of the sclera is covered by conjunctiva, plus the inner surface of the eyelid is also covered by conjunctiva. So you know that the part of the conjunctiva that covers the sclera is called bulbar conjunctiva, bulb of the eye. And the conjunctiva that lines the inner surface of the eyelid. This is the palpebral conjunctiva. अब ये जो eyelid की जो glands हैं, they develop from surface ectoderm. When you do the histology of the eyelid, you will you'll find out that the eyelid is not just a fold of skin. It is a little firm. If you touch it, it is a little firm because it has a tarsal plate in it and it has an abundance of connective tissue. So the eyelid contains tarsal plate and connective tissue. और ये जो है tarsal plate and connective tissue, this develops from this mesenchyme, which is lying between the two layers of ectoderm. इस mesenchyme से tarsal plate or connective tissue. And then, if you remember correctly, eyelid में you also have the orbicularis oculi muscle. ये जो orbicularis oculi है, ये skeletal muscle था, second pharyngeal arch से ये develop करता है. Let's see आगे क्या है, जल्दी जल्दी कर. Lacrimal gland, I think this is the last slide. Development next time anomalies कर लेंगे. बेटा lacrimal gland भी जो है ना वो surface epithelium से ही ectoderm से ही होता है. ये surface ectoderm कौन सी, जो superior conjunctival convex जो ectoderm है उससे develop होता है. ये surface epithelium जो है पहले tubules बनती हैं इससे, then these tubules के end पे you have the development of the alveoli और ये जो tubular part है that develops into duct. बिल्कुल वही जो मैंने आपको बताया था salivary glands की development. So basically ये exocrine gland हुआ. So इसकी भी वही development है. Tubules develop की, tubules develop के ends पे, अच्छा खंसा के लिए था, I thought मेरे लिए था. Anyway, tubules के end पे dilated, the ends of the tubules get dilated, develop into alveoli, and the tubules then themselves develop into ducts. Okay. So now these alveoli and ducts, they are arranged in two groups. You have a gland proper and you have a palpebral part of the gland. और lacrimal sac, nasolacrimal duct, ये हमने बहुत डिटेल में की थी when we were doing the development of face. So उसको मैं repeat नहीं करना चाहती. Just remember कि 6th week में the lacrimal gland begins to function. 1 to 3 months of extrauterine life में tears are produced. If you please observe next time you see a newborn baby, वो बच्चा रोता तो है but आंसू नहीं होते. ठीक है? Okay, then best of luck. I will see you day after tomorrow, Saturday. with the congenital anomalies of the eye. It's Khuda Hafiz from my side. God bless you all.